Hello, hi, I'm Judith. This year's Global Chess Festival has its theme of creativity and innovation. So it was kind of obvious for me to make a special study competition, the Chess Artistry Competition. And I would like to introduce the judge of the competition, as I was really happy when I asked him if he will take the role of being the judge. He said yes immediately. So please welcome John Nunn, who is a friend of mine and a fantastic personality, an author, a solver, a composer. He has his publishing house. So please welcome. Hi, John.
Hi Judith, thanks for inviting me to be the judge of this tourney. It was a very interesting experience and I'm hoping to show some of these studies off today.
Yeah, for me, it was something very special to do this event. We have to say to the audience, because not everybody knows that how this competition works. Of course, this had to be made a lot of plannings. As for the composers, you need to give time, right? So we started out in the first days of May and we gave 3 months for the composers to compose. And only after that, John, you received the big amount of compositions, nearly 50 of them, which was quite amazing for me, receiving it from the best composers in the world. And then you had your time, no names. This is very important. Anonymously, you received all the studies and you started to work on them. And you took a lot of time. I know how you deal with things. You're extremely precise. You make an extremely perfect and perfectionist attitude and style. So this is also the reason I was so happy that you take this role. Can you tell me a little bit about what it takes to be a judge?
Well, you have to have had quite a lot of experience with endgame studies. It's important to know what's been done before because originality in the compositions is a very important factor. There are databases to help you, but sometimes, even if you search the database, you don't find exactly the same idea, but something very similar. So, first of all, I checked the studies for soundness, and then I checked them to see how original they were. Some cases, there's some overlap with previous studies, and you have to judge how significant that is. And then I played them all over several times to assess their artistic merit, which is, after all, what the competition is all about. So it takes quite a lot of time and patience, but you get there in the end, and it's fun doing it as well.
So, what is the process for you when, because this is not the only tournament where you're judging, so you have quite an experience. What is the process for you when you receive the anonymous study compositions? Do you pick them like you have to be in the mood? You're picking them by intuition, like what is really appealing on the screen for you, or what do you have any system of sorting them out?
I do have a sort of system. After I've done the initial process of checking for soundness and originality, I then put them in a kind of rough order. And then I like to take a break because sometimes you realize your initial enthusiasms perhaps could do with some modification. So I print them all out and I have a pile of pieces of paper and I put them in one order. Then I wait a few days and I look through them all again and I shuffle them around a bit and some go up and some go down. And then finally, when I'm really happy that I've got them in an order I'm totally satisfied with, I create what's called a preliminary award, where the composers can make comments. Sometimes they notice, for example, anticipations that I haven't. So I take those into account and produce then the final award, which is what we've got today, which can then be published and, well, becomes part of chess endgame history.
Yeah, you made a very good selection, though I have to tell you that when I saw them first, I had many of them, which was quite appealing to me. We also want to say and highlight, I think, that this composition tourney was focusing specifically on positions mainly which can arise from practical game. This is, of course, it's for me because I simply love all kind of puzzles and compositions. When I was little, I was solving mate in twos, helpmates, all kind of things. But then really, really what's still very close to my heart is always the practical kind of endgame studies. What are your feelings about it? Do you like most the studies, or you have other compositions which you prefer?
I've always liked studies. I also like problems of all types. Helpmates are my favourite, in fact. Um, but yeah, when I started becoming interested in endgame studies, I was quite young, and I found a book in my local public library of endgame studies, and I was fascinated. I didn't know people made up endgames, and this book, which is actually by a Hungarian author, um, had mainly positions of interest to over the board players, and that's how my interest in studies was kindled, and I've remained fascinated by them ever since.
So when did you started to, because I know exactly that you're not only a judge and the composer yourself, but you're also solving world champion, I think even two times. What
Three
are the
times.
different three times? I'm sorry. Three times by now. Okay. So what is really the difference between the three parts of work or passion or whatever? What angle you have to be your mindset if you're a solver, let's say?
Well, if you're a solver, you can, of course, solve many problems by trial and error, but that's generally too slow for competitive solving. So, what you have to try to do is to spot the composer's idea, which enables you to find a solution much more quickly. So, a knowledge of chess problem ideas or themes is very important for the quick solving you need for, say, the World Championship. In game studies, it's a bit similar, but obviously there is much more of a connection to over the board play there. And some of the positions in this Benko Memorial Tourney were really of quite a lot of interest to over the board players. And actually, I've shown a couple of them around, and well, they don't find these things so easy to solve.
You know, I find something extremely interesting, and for me, it was not something that I was paying attention to before. That there are many composers who compose something amazing, beautiful, even very long lines, and they are not even 2000 player of rating. They might be even 1600 of over the board rating they have. What do you think? How is that possible? Because there are quite a few great composers who are chess grandmasters or international masters, right? But how is it possible that a 1600 player can compose something which is a brain teaser and a great puzzle for a grandmaster?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm not a 1600 player, so it's difficult for me to answer. But I guess that these days the use of computers makes a huge difference in that they can do a lot of the sort of boring mechanical work of checking these studies for soundness, so that the perhaps the composers who are not such strong players also have a chance. And the use of computers has opened up the world to a wider range of people than was possible hitherto. And you see, in this tourney, you've got all types. One prize-winning study was by famous grandmaster Jan Timman, and but some of the other composers were not strong players. So you can compose studies and problems really no matter how strong you are these days.
So going back a little bit to the competition itself, how much do you use as a judge the computer itself, and which stages do you use for checking?
I use it mainly for checking for soundness. Um, I can't analyse 50 complicated studies by hand in a reasonable time, so I use the computer. I check. Mostly, these days they're sound because the composers themselves have used the computer. Occasionally, you find something they've overlooked, and of course, I use study databases to check for similar studies that have been published in the past. So the use of the computer has eased the judging process to a certain extent. But the assessment of artistic merit, and of course, the computer can't help you at all. You have to do it entirely based on your experience and judgment.
So one more question before we go and see some action. If you have to estimate, how much time were you spending on judging and selecting and the way you selected?
Um, I don't like to add that up because if I did, I'd probably never do it again.
Okay. Then I didn't ask you this one. And also, maybe you can just tell me a little bit what kind of prizes there is in a competition and what we are giving out here.
Well, study composers and problem composers really do it for the honour. There's little or no money in it. Sometimes there are trophies or certificates, but really they do it for the sake of the composing art. So there's no financial benefit to it. Believe me, it takes a long time to compose a good study or a good problem. So they do it because they enjoy it.
Yeah, and you had 20 selected into three parts.
Yes, there's a tradition in composing, chess composing generally, that the award is divided into three parts. The top part of the award are the prizes, and then there's a second tier, which are the honourable mentions, and the third tier is commendations. And the judge has complete authority to decide how many of each type there should be. The standard was quite high in this tourney, so there are quite a long list of studies in each of the three categories.
So thanks very much for making those selections. I think it was also possible to have so many prizes because the level was very high, as you mentioned before we were discussing. And now, before we go to see this wonderful first prize from Chess Artistry Competition, I would like to show you that I made a special gift and prize, which probably also the winner does not know, but I want to reveal that I asked a friend of mine, Maria Yugina, to make an artwork which has the first prize position on it. So this is exactly, you're not recognizing exactly the pieces yet, but just in a minute, we are going to be asking John to show it on the board, and we are going to change the artwork to a chessboard. So let's see the position, which was taking first prize in our competition. So I give you the floor, John, to explain the composer and the ideas.
Yes, well, the composer of this study is Sergei Diduk. He won the first prize. It's white to play and win. And if we take a quick look at the position, we'll see that white is 2 pawns up. The black knight is trapped in the corner, and white, in fact, can take it immediately. So there are actually two possibilities for white on the first move, one of which works and one of which doesn't. So I'm going to work my way up, and first we'll show you why taking the knight immediately doesn't win for white. So we're looking at a line here which is tempting but not correct. Black gives a check, and again there are two possibilities for white. Let's first of all look at what happens if white puts his bishop on h2, blocks the check. Black pushes his c pawn, and white gives discovered check. The reason he gives this check is that he wants to swing the rook over to c4 and stop the black pawn from promoting. Black, however, sacrifices his rook. White takes back, and now black plays pawn equals queen, which looks crazy because white can fork the king and the queen. So check, but now black reveals
And
the point. Yeah, sorry?
yeah, this is where I want to say that if it's a practical game, you may just think, go with it, you calculate, or I can visualize it if somebody is playing a rapid game or blitz game. You're just thinking that, okay, rook c4, I exchange, win the queen, I have three extra pawns, even different color bishop, and I just win the game. And then the surprise comes.
Yeah, then the surprise comes because it looks like the black king has quite a lot of freedom, but it turns out if he goes to this square, b6, he blocks in his own bishop, and when white takes the queen, there's a very surprising stalemate of black with his bishop immobilized on a5. So that's a really surprising drawing continuation, ending up in stalemate. And if we go back to the position after black's, remember that white has incorrectly taken the knight on h1 and black has checked with his rook on h8. Now let's look at the second possibility for white, which is to return with his king to g1. Black now gives a check with his bishop. White must interpose, it's his only legal move, and black swaps. Okay, now we have an interesting position because it really looks as though white is going to win here. Black pushes his pawn, and white again opens up the rank for his rook to go to c4. Now, I've shown this position to some over-the-board players, and they've had great difficulty in finding the drawing move for black in this position. Okay, they try to queen, and white checks with his rook. Black gives up his queen, and the resulting ending, white has 3 pawns for the exchange, but they're all passed on the king side, and the black rook is just overwhelmed. The black forces are overwhelmed by the armada of white pawns on the king side. So queening here doesn't work. Also, it doesn't work, for example, for black to play his rook to c8, because white can just give up the rook for the c pawn and win in much the same way. And some people have really struggled to find the drawing move here, and it's really, really surprising for over-the-board players. Black
So why do you
puts
think,
in,
sorry, why do
yeah,
you think it's so difficult for us practical players to find something like this? Because I have an idea that, for example, this is what helped me a lot, I think, in practical chess, that I was solving many problems and I understood that even the most difficult positions, there may be some saving solution. But still, why is it so difficult for us? Is it not natural move, or your
it's not a
intuition says that you lost?
well, it's an idea that doesn't normally occur in over-the-board play, and the over-the-board player's natural instinct is to keep his pieces active. You know, you might think, well, it'd be nice to have the rook somewhere like on c1, or where it can perhaps attack the b pawn. So there's this instinct to keep your pieces active, to keep your rook on a good square. And the idea that the best thing to do is to bury it in the corner so that it has no moves at all is something that's entirely foreign to over-the-board players. And let's just see how that works. Black puts his rook, well, he moves right across to the opposite corner, burying his rook behind his own pawn. And this is just like, seems a hugely unnatural move to over-the-board players. But we can see that there's again a stalemate idea here, because if white now checks, and in fact he doesn't really have anything better, black now puts his king on b8 rather than on b6 like in the preceding line, and he's prevented his rook from moving at all. So if white now takes the pawn on c2, it's just stalemate. And the amazing thing is that although it's white has a free move, he doesn't have to take the pawn. There's nothing he can do to lift the stalemate. I mean, of course, he could give a check. King comes out, check again, but the king just goes back again, and it hasn't changed the situation. Even with this free move, before black promotes his pawn and forces white to take it, there's no move white can play that will relieve the stalemate. And this burying of the rook in the corner, although it's something that study composers have done before, is very surprising for over-the-board players. I should add that the really original thing, or the two really original things about this study, are that two different stalemates, one in which the king buries the bishop on a5, and one in which the king buries the rook on a8. I mean, do you find this very surprising, Judith?
I found it amazing, to be honest. I mean, first of all, the other stalemate, which we've seen previously when the bishop was buried and couldn't move on a5, I just simply thought that, wow, finally, with the badly placed piece, you can profit out of that, you know. So it is so good that finally you're happy with having a bad piece like that. So no, I was completely amazed that in this one study, it's possible to have and use the a6 pawn for double stalemate pattern, which both of them are very unusual. And as you said, that what is more even more striking, it's amazing that white has extra move, because before with bishop on a5, black queen, so it was forcing, right? White had to be taking the queen, there was no other choice. But here you're just like, I want to make the winning move, and you realize that you're trapped. It's a stalemate, whatever you do. So this is a fantastic one, I believe.
Okay, well, let's go back to the starting position and see what white should play and how he can defeat black's stalemate defence. The correct move is quite surprising. It's not to take the knight immediately. It's instead to drop the bishop back to h2. Already a really unexpected move, but it again has this idea that you're going to push the pawn and give a check and then switch the rook behind the pawn. And at the moment, black still has his knight on the board and his other pieces. So right now, there's no stalemate possibility. And black's best defence is again quite surprising. He, in fact, jettisons his knight. He forces white to take it, otherwise there's no discovered check. But by getting rid of the knight, he again creates a stalemate possibility. But this time it's slightly different, and the slight difference enables white to defeat black's stalemating plans. Anyhow, white takes, and now that we have the same position we had before, only that the king is on g1 instead of h1. And this is the thing that makes the difference. Before that, black had the check on h8, but now he again has to give a check, but he has to give the check now with the bishop. So he gives this check, forces the king to go, well, white has to put his king on h1, of course. If he interposes the bishop, he no longer has a discovered check. Black continues trying to set up a similar stalemate to last time. Bishop goes back, and now black pushes his passed pawn. White gives his check. Black sacrifices his rook. We've seen all this before, but the difference is that in the previous position, the black bishop was on a5. Now it's on b6. So to set up the stalemate takes black one extra move. He has to play his bishop back to a5. And that's what he does now. He hopes that white's going to check on c4, and let's see what happens if he checks on c4. Black puts his king on b6, and again we have the situation where, although white has a spare move, there's no way he can prevent black from promoting and forcing the stalemate. You'll notice, for example, that the pawn on g2 prevents the white bishop from moving off the diagonal, which would give the black king a move after the rook moves away. So it's similar to the lateral stalemate we saw before, that even with the spare move, there's nothing white can do. So it means that in this position, white has to be a bit more clever. He mustn't check straight away. First of all, he has to play a quite surprising bishop move. And it's the only square that works, for a reason that we'll see in a moment. Black now queens, white checks. Black tries to do the same thing as before, but it doesn't work, because after white takes the queen, the black king has a move. It can take the bishop. So the purpose of the bishop move, let's just see the bishop move again. Bishop move to b5 was to cross the square c4 and put the bishop en prise to the black king when the king's on b6. So white is playing a preparatory move to defeat the stalemate. And that was only possible because of the way white played earlier with his clever first move not taking the knight. He forced black to lose a tempo by giving the bishop check. So he had to put the bishop back on a5 to set up the stalemate. This gave white the extra move at this point he needs to give the black king a square. So it's a really subtle study with these two different stalemates and white playing very cleverly to get around black's defence. A remarkable composition, actually.
Yeah, I also thought it's remarkable with so many details, ideas, and also if you would go back a move before, please.
Sure.
So before bishop b5, no, after bishop
Oh,
a5,
okay. Yeah.
after bishop a5, uh, this is again, I visualize it that you're playing blitz and you instantly play rook c4, obviously, right?
Yeah.
and you go rook c4, you get king b6, and then you're having your head, oh, what did I do? I was winning, right?
Yeah.
And again, in this study, it repeatedly happens that it's not move to move from point of view that it would be a queen already, as in the other line. It's
Hmm.
just you don't know, you cannot do anything positive to your position, even though you have an extra move, right? So this
Yeah,
is something amazes me a lot.
yeah, it is almost exact echo of the situation when the black rook was on a8 and the king was on b8. Even with the extra move, white cannot release the stalemate. It's very surprising.
Yeah. So before I say goodbye from you, I want to ask one more question. That was it easy to pick this one, this specific one, to have the winner, or there were other candidates which were very, very close, so you had to think days whether which one to pick?
I think I settled on this one fairly early on. Some of the other positions I thought for a long time and swapped studies around, but with this one, even in my very first run through, I thought this is going to be probably the first prize winner because it struck me straight away that this was very surprising. And although, as I say, the stalemate with the rook on a8 and king on b8 has been seen before, the combination of the two stalemates and the cunning way in which the stalemate is defeated appears to be completely original. So we have, you know, fairly, really creative effort by the composer.
Well, thank you very much, John, for sharing your thoughts and gave a little insight what it takes to be a judge. And thanks very much for being the judge of this event. And I know that it took a lot of time of you, but I think it's worth it because we can, all of us, appreciate all these beautiful studies which we received. And we are going to get back to you with new episodes with new studies. Thank you.
Thank you.